wearing the proper paint mask, then you wouldn't have a problem with this.
Well, it didn't have filters on it.
After I blew my nose last night, I was like, yeah, I should have wore a mask. To blow my nose? Oh yeah. It was literally latex paint.
We'll have to like backwash the pool filter because I think that's where the majority came off. Baptizing himself like. White.
All right. Someone want to open us up in prayer this morning? I will then. Father God, thank you for today, for the blessing of this body, Lord. I pray that you would help us to put aside the worldly concerns that we may have, Lord, that you would help us to focus on you today, increase our zeal, and I pray that our fellowship and worship is worthy, and thank you for all that you provide us. I pray that you would be with those who are absent, Janine, Julia, Wendy, and Pastor and his family. I pray that you would watch over Pastor as he travels. And in your name we pray. Amen. All right. So last weekend, whoops, you're good. Last weekend we did a quick review on the correlating the kingdoms within Daniel to Revelation. So we talked about the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in his statue and just the growth of each of the kingdoms. So first one being Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, second one being Assyria, and then third one being Greece, and the fourth dreadful we looked at was the apex, or the caliph, Islamic caliph, which would have, at the apex, would have been the Umayyad Caliphate. So this was just a comparison, if you remember. So we looked at during the height of Rome versus during the Umayyad Caliphate reign. And then we drew correlation between Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. So the lion is the first head, the bear is second head, the leopard is the third beast with the four heads, and then the fourth beast, the dreadful beast, has a head with 10 horns. And in Daniel, it mentions a 11th horn that springs up. And then in Daniel 7, we drew correlation to Revelation. So first beast correlates with the third head in Revelation, given the viewpoint from John. So he's looking at it from a historical standpoint, where Daniel was looking at it from a prophecy standpoint. So it's commonly agreed on that the first two heads are Assyria and Egypt, and then Revelation picks up or starts correlating with Daniel, with Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then if you remember in Revelation it talks about there's a beast that currently is. So during John's time, right, who was Israel subject to? Rome. So correlating that to the sixth head, which Daniel doesn't really mention, but it does make mention of the fourth beast, the dreadful beast, which Revelation also mentions, that has 10 horns. but instead in Daniel it talks about the single horn that it presents itself like a lamb. The Revelation or John speaks of this revived head that has two horns. So, I mentioned that in my viewpoint, one horn represents the civil leader, and then the second horn represents the religious leader. So in Islamic culture, that would be the Sultan, which was kind of a new idea within Islam that came about during the Ottoman Empire. And then the second horn would be what Muslims call the 12th Imam, or the Mahdi. So that's their prophet to come that will save and establish the Islamic nation. Whoops. Is that it? Is that the end of the slide? There we go. All right. So then we looked at Daniel, chapter 2. So chapter 2, verse 40 through 43, it says that this fourth beast will be as strong as iron. So kind of looking back through our study of the Muslims, of Arabs, we looked at they became a strong people through their unity, through their language. So Arabic became a cornerstone to their culture. So that language, coupled with the motivations and ideas of Muhammad, became their strength, their cornerstone, which also would lead to the Quran. And then the combination of mercenary tendencies of the Bedouins and the warrior attributes of the Turks would lead to a nation that would expand faster and stronger than most of the nations that came before it. And then it says in Daniel 2 that the kingdoms will be partly strong and partly brittle. So all of the key instruments in establishing Islam or the Muslims as a strong nation would also cause derision, corruption, and wars. So with the passing of Muhammad, the establishment of the caliphate caused derision among the Arabs. So there was a claim to legitimacy, which led to the split, which would be the Shia and Sunni Muslims. And then on top of that, Arabic began being adopted by Persians and then by the Turks. So then the importance of the true Arab disappeared, and by the time of the Ottoman Empire, the true Arabs, the Bedouins, had consolidated back to the peninsula, Saudi Arabia. And then Daniel also mentions that the feet is mixed with iron and clay. So, this means that they will cement their alliances, and actually Daniel actually says this, that they will cement their alliances by intermarriages. So if you remember in our study, most of the political relationships that were established between first the tribes of the Arabs was done through intermarriage to try to create a cohesion. And then as more and more nations adopted Arabic and the religion, the leaders would offer up their daughters for intermarriage to, again, establish a political relationship.
Count the toes.
2, 3,
Yeah, I counted those last weekend.
Yeah. Good call. There's 12 horns, right? Overall. All right. So, where did my Bible? Yeah.
That's what I thought, it was AI mixed up.
No, it's intentional. I think I just grabbed this image from the Google. It could be an AI mix-up. I don't know how, like, what would you input to have it spit out 12 toes?
Please compose the image with context.
Yeah. So interestingly, you know, we've been looking at Daniel and John, but even David receives a prophecy regarding what we've been discussing. If we turn, I'll read it. Psalm 83 says, a psalm of Asaph. God, don't remain silent, don't stay quiet, God, or still, because here are your enemies causing an uproar. Those who hate you are raising their heads, craftily conspiring against you, people consulting together against those you treasure. They say, come, let's wipe them out as a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more. With one mind they plot their schemes, their covenant they have made against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and Hagrim, Gabal, Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines and those living in Tyre. Asher too is allied with them to reinforce the descendants of Lot. Do to them as you did to Midian, to Sisera and Yavin at Veda Kishan. They were destroyed at Eden Dor and became manure for the ground. Make their leaders like Orav and Zev, all their princes like Zevach and Zolmunna, who said, let's take possession of God's meadows for ourselves. So, first off, what are the nations that are mentioned here? Okay.
At that time, but also that could also be a reference to they mixed together as one Israel nation.
Right, it says they join an alliance, they make a covenant. So first we have Ammon. So Ammon is from the region of Syria. Then we have Edom. Edom is in the region of current-day Jordan. You have Hazarenes. They are from the region of Egypt. You have Gabal, which is northern Lebanon and southern Turkey. You have the Philistines. Obviously, we know where they reside. Amalek is from the northern part of Saudi Arabia. You have Assyria or Asher. So they represent the region of Iraq. The sons of Lot would be in the region of the West Bank, so north of Israel, current-day Israel. And then you have the Ishmaelites. Who are the Ishmaelites? Sons of Ishmael. So we looked at this when we studied the history of Arabs. So all the Arabs claim that they are descendants of Ishmael, right? So Ishmael would represent Saudi Arabia. So you have Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, Philistine, Gaza, northern Saudi Arabia, Iraq, West Bank, and Saudi Arabia. So what is the purpose of their alliance between the nations? Right. What does it say in verse?
Verse 5, they say, "Come, let's destroy their nation.
Right.
Let the name of Israel be remembered no more."
And then in verse 13 it says, let's take possession of God's meadows for ourselves. So they lay claim on the land of Israel. So that is their motivation to their alliance. So the Jordanians, if you guys remember, I don't know if you guys studied this in history class, but the Jordanians ruled over Jerusalem from 1948 to 1967. So they took Jerusalem during the Arab-Israeli War, and then they annexed a portion of mandatory Palestine to become known as the West Bank. So their goal and what they achieved was to ethnically cleanse the Jewish quarter. Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, who is the most powerful political authority in the Islamic Republic, which is essentially made up of Iran, Pakistan, and Mauritania. So Khamenei has called on Muslim nations to fight against Israel, who is not a state but a terrorist garrison. So they do not recognize Israel as a legitimate state. Iranian officials have called for the end of Israel, including by referendum that would exclude most of the Jews while including Palestinians in the region and abroad. And then in Sunni Islam, Jerusalem is the third holy city. So remember, we discussed this in the view of what Jerusalem represents to the Muslims. So Jerusalem is the third holy city after Mecca and Medina. So they believe it is their place where Muhammad ascended to heaven during his night journey in 621. So they view Jerusalem as the capital of their future state. And then since 1948, Iraq has refused to recognize Israel as a legitimate state and has participated in a number of wars against Israel. If you remember, they carried out a missile campaign against Israel where they launched 42 Scud missiles at Israeli cities, and their goal was to provoke Israel to respond in kind, because Israel was in the process of establishing a unified relationship with the U.S. to battle or attack Iraq. So has a similar look and feel to the current situation, right? Hamas invades Israel, trying to provoke a response, and the Abraham Accords were going on at that time, which have now been either delayed or hopefully just delayed. So just some current events that kind of show the motivation of some of these nations. So let's see, where am I? So I mentioned we're going to talk about who these 10 horns represent. And there's two kind of, well, there's one popular idea that I'll present, and then there's also an idea that I kind of prescribe to, although I think there's merit for both cases. So the first idea is present within some of the what do you call them, sages of Islam, or not Islam, Israel. And that idea is, so when we read Psalm 83, how many nations did we list? Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, Gaza, northern Saudi Arabia, Iraq, West Bank, Saudi Arabia, and I'm missing one. Why did I miss one? Oh, Turkey. Yeah. So, 10. So the scholars, Israeli scholars, sages is the right word, right? Yeah, that's what they call think. So that is where they prescribe to the 10 horns in Daniel. So horn 1 represents Syria. Well, not in any particular order, but you have Syria, Jordan, Egypt, northern Lebanon, southern Turkey, Philistines or Gaza, northern Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the West Bank, the Ishmaelites, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon, which would be Tyre. That's the one I forgot. Which would make sense. They're all, when we look at, remember we talked about in Revelation 13, where'd it go? Yes, in verse 8 it says, everyone living on earth will worship it except those whose names are written in the book of life. So, we talked about, does this mean everyone on the whole earth or just everyone in the region of Israel? Because oftentimes in Scripture, when it says the whole earth, it's just dealing with the region of Israel. And so if it is dealing with the region of Israel, that's every single nation that surrounds Israel. And they are all of what religion? Islam. So in Israel, at least in some of the scholars' viewpoint, there is an alliance formed between these nations, and their goal is to remove Israel from its land and establish Jerusalem as their capital. Now there's, then you have the 2 horns. So you have the Sultan, who's the civil leader. Common idea, given some of the motivations of especially radical Islam, is that this leader will come out of either Turkey or Iran or Saudi Arabia. So Turkey and Iran and Saudi Arabia are kind of the more popular ideas because both are established economically. Iran, obviously has been having a lot of issues, both economically and socially, a lot of conflict. And there's a lot more unity within these 2 countries. And then the horn, the 12th Ayman, is more related to what tribe he will come from. Does anybody remember the royal tribe that Muhammad came from?
I know it's a smaller tribe of the...
Starts with a Q.
Or,
Quraysh. Quraysh tribe. So there's that viewpoint. And then there's the viewpoint that the 10 horns, and part of the reason for that is, equating Psalm 83 is back in Daniel chapter 7, it talks about how the small horn that arises will pluck 3 of the horns up. So basically saying that he will remove power from 3 of the leaders of these nations. So they exist during the same time period. So that's one way that they read Daniel 7. Another way is to read it is that the small horn will inherit or continue the authority that these 3 horns had. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in existence during the same time period. It's just they continue the same authority. There's the other viewpoint, which, I mean, I don't prescribe to either. I think one has, as much legitimacy as the other. But the other viewpoint is that the 10 horns represent 10 caliphs that have already, at John's time, because it says these 10 horns have not yet come. So during John's time, the caliph hadn't been established yet. So that these 10 horns are 10 of the most influential and powerful caliphs in history. And those were, and I'll go through them here briefly. So if you remember the first caliph, who was Abu Bakr, so he established the Rashidun Caliph. So he was from the Quraysh tribe. Then you had Umar ibn Khattab. He was also under the Rashidun Caliph. So he took the Rashidun Caliph and vastly expanded the empire. And then you had Uthman ibn Affan. So he furthered the Rashidun Caliph even further. And then you have Ali ibn Abi Talib. Some may consider him or not. And then a big one is Muawiyah. So he established the Umayyad Caliph. He was also from the Quraysh tribe, and he is the one that established the largest empire that the world had seen at that time. And then even today, it still remains the 7th largest nation in history. And if you remember, he moved the capital from Mecca up to Damascus. So Damascus became the capital, and Jerusalem became the primary stronghold. So they took over Jerusalem and established it as basically their military stronghold. Then you have Abd al-Malik. So Abd al-Malik, he oversaw the construction of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. That was in 692, I believe. Then you had Walid I, who further expanded the empire, and Umar II. He was legendary among Islams because he promoted equality, and he facilitated conversion to Islam by making taxes less lenient on non-Arabs. And then you have Abu Abbas as-Saffah, who established the Abbasid Caliphate. And then you have Al-Manzur, who he relocated the capital to Baghdad. So he focused on the spread of knowledge and the spread of Arab culture. And then, if you remember, towards the end of his rule, the Seljuks began invading. So the Seljuks were the Turks coming down from the southern region of Russia. And then Harun al-Rashid, he was most famous among the Abbasids because he built the Grand Library within Baghdad, and he focused a lot of effort on converting a lot of the Greek writings to Arabic. So that was kind of the Abbasid Caliphate was kind of the golden age of Islam. So they did a lot of put a lot of effort into expanding their knowledge. And then you have the Seljuk Empire. So the Seljuk Empire adopted Sunni Islam, and that's when they established the office of the Sultan. And then, if you remember, the Mongols advanced on Baghdad, which basically put an end to the Abbasid Caliphate. And then you have that's when the Osman came about, Caliphate Osman, and he established the Ottoman Empire. So those are the 10 caliphs that that some people equate to the 10 horns. So those are the two common ideas.
So, question, in the case of where it's all the caliphs that are named off, it was all still considered just the one empire
Correct.
during that entire time.
Right.
So back in Daniel chapter 8, with the vision of the ram and the he-goat,
Mm-hmm.
it talks about the he-goat became very powerful, but at the height of its power, the great horn, the he-goat represents obviously Greece. Great horn was shattered, and in its place came up 4 others facing the 4 winds of the heaven. And we know that when Alexander died, that it was 4 generals that took his place,
Right.
and his empire was basically broken up into 4 separate empires. So I only want to present that to, maybe back the idea that maybe if we're dealing with an empire like Alexander's that start off with 1 horn and then broke up into, they had the same foundation, those 4 empires, but
Right.
it was all broken up basically afterwards into 4.
So you're suggesting that, if you follow the same kind of construct, you have the 10 horns would represent basically a nation divided.
So John's vision of this great beast, and the revelation is obviously it's future. It's for that time leading up to when the Lord returns. So this beast will be some great empire or foundational ideas thereof, and then the 10 horns would probably represent basically 10 empires or nations or something that
Coexist.
basically all have the same foundation, which is that beast.
Okay. Yep. So given that, are they nations with the same foundation that exist during the same time period? Or could they be just nations that have existed throughout history that prescribe to the same kind of rule or government system?
Well, if we're keeping to the same idea that the he-goat in Daniel is the reference to, then those four empires existed at the same time. So it wasn't something that was sequential through time.
Right.
It was all at the same time. that
Right.
Those four empires existed.
That's a good point. Okay. So regardless, we know that, whether it's these nations that surround Israel that have leaders that that follow the same, or actually, basically bend the knee to the government system, the caliph, essentially. We know that this beast, or the caliph, is a reestablishment of the same or similar government system that we've been talking about in history. So if in Revelation 13:11, or in Revelation 13, it talks about how the beast received a mortal wound, right, and then was revived. And it says it had the two horns like those of a lamb. So when we talk about this revived government system, there's been, I guess, what does that look like in modern day? So the Islamic State of Iraq had a designated caliph. His name was al-Baghdadi. I don't know if that name rings a bell. It should, from at the time, President Trump's speech, al-Baghdadi, he cried like a baby, and it's pretty funny. So al-Baghdadi was a self-proclaimed caliph. He was the first in almost 100 years to establish a caliphate. So he officially announced his ascension in 2014. So that was the first attempt to establish a caliph. There is a widespread belief within Islam that the Ottoman Caliph was a universal caliph to whom all Muslims owed allegiance. So this movement is called the Caliphate movement, and it is a growing idea among Islam who share an anti-colonial caliphate. So in their view, if and when a caliph is established, it should be based around the structure of the Ottoman Empire. And that's why a lot of the Israeli scholars believe that the caliph will be established out of Turkey. It also says that in Revelation 13:13, this beast will perform great miracles, even causing fire to come down from heaven onto earth as people watch. So if you think about current day events and the spread of Islam, in order for the caliph to exist in modern age, it would have to be nothing short of miraculous. Why do I say that? So if you remember the challenges that Muhammad faced when he tried to bring a mixed group of people of different tribes together, they had different motivations, they had different religions, some didn't have any religions. In order to bring them together, it was a pretty difficult feat. and then you take that feat and magnify it on a magnitude larger, much larger, for this caliph to be reestablished would have to be an amazing accomplishment, because Islam has spread over many nations. There's many ethnicities involved. I mean, you have India. You know, if we're not focusing on just the Middle East, you have India, you have Africa, majority of Africa. You have parts of Spain, France, now England. I don't know if you guys have been watching news and what's going on in England.
Who's the caliph? Do they demand everybody to follow him, or can it be located?
Well, depends on how they structure it. Depends on, you know, if they structure it around some of the caliphs' empires throughout history, there would be leniency towards non-Arab people. I say non-Arab because that term is used to encompass all Muslims now. There are some caliphs that were lenient. You know, they would tax you for not being Arab, but they'd let you live, you know. Huh? Yeah. And then there were caliphs that, you know, would persecute you for not being Arab and heavily tax you. And if you're Israeli, if it follows the mindset of Iraq, where, you know, you're not even allowed to enter into Iraq if you're an Israelite, yeah, it just depends on how they structure it. So it would be miraculous to be able to unify. You know, you've got different sects. You got Sunni and Shia. You have fundamental Islamists, the extremists, and then you have the more moderate, to unify them under the same governing rule. So, and there's been studies done. There's organizations such as the Islamic Conference who have met a number of times to discuss the challenges in implementing a caliph. I was reading a study done by the Center for Strategic Studies, where these organizations list some of the common challenges, which are, you know, this caliph would have to be accepted by existing national state systems that are already in place. So, you know, you're talking about the big, you know, just looking at Iraq and Iran, that would be a huge challenge to bring cohesion there, because they have their own national state systems, and how they operate is much different, and their ideology. The sheer scale of the Muslim world, which I mentioned, so just the sheer number of Muslims spread out throughout all the nations, the violent rivalry among competing groups, and the fragmentation and diversity of Muslims. So according to these organizations, it's next to impossible to reestablish caliph, and they've almost given up on the idea. The only ones that are currently pursuing and actively trying to implement a caliph are your Muslim extremist groups. So that'd be Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, groups like that. So I could see why, you know, it would be, for a single leader to rise up and unify the people, the Muslims, would be amazing. I mean, it'd be a huge accomplishment.
Even at the same time, millions of people make a journey to Mecca every single year.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to know more, like, you know, do all these groups put aside their, you know, their ideology to partake in the Hajjah, the pilgrimage? Okay. I think next weekend, actually not next, yeah, next weekend, because camp is 2 weekends from now. I'll try and wrap up the lesson, looking at, so tying this together with the harlot and the dragon, looking at that, and then hopefully get back into some. I mean, this is worthwhile study, but you know, it's just prophecy. And we'll talk about what we do with it. Like, all right, so if it is, you know, Islam, then so what? What do we do with that knowledge?
That fills my stomach with dread or apprehension, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because the parallels between this and just what's happening right now in the world is very, I mean, you can see it happening.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the big question is, all right, what's next?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I'll turn this off. Anna, is there any